constitutional making should start with actually looking at the values of a society. What are our values? I did not choose to be born in Sri Lanka. I did not choose to be born to the Sinhala race. I did not choose to be born to the Vikramatha family. I did not choose my father's religion. None of this. This is all given to me. So what are the values actually in constitutional making? That precedes constitutional making. You know, we are all born equal. That has to be a value. Dignity, respecting each other has to be a value. The rule of law and justice has to be a value. Democracy is also a value because there are totalitarian states in the world. So democracy is also a value. And then the whole issue of social justice. You know, people are unequal. They are vulnerable. They are the poor, the elderly, children, all these people. So what are the values? And the values must be reflected in the Constitution. Then we go into democracy, and then we have often, we refer to democracy as majoritarianism. If you have the majority votes, that's what goes. It doesn't work like that. If you look at the justice system, it's not a question of majoritarianism. When Jesus Christ was brought before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who was also governor and the chief justice of the country, because it was not in new modern political theory. It was an old theory. What did the crowd say? Crowd said basically get rid of him, crucify him. Majoritarianism. So majoritarianism is a problem because there are values and there is justice which is beyond majoritarianism. We need to understand all of this in constitutional making. Idealism versus second best. I don't believe in quotas. Quotas for women, quotas for youth. But women and youth must be represented. So we go for a second best solution. We say a quota for women. We say a quota for youth. And I believe in that, and for a period of time we should have it, because that's the way to correct a system. And after that, women and youth don't come based on quotas given by us. They come by their own right and by their own ability. People are talking of systems change, and this whole systems change, we have been talking about it for the last few months. Why is a systems change needed? Because those who govern must govern with responsibility and accountability. That is the major issue. 19A, the amendment increased accountability. We had independent constitutional council, we had commissions, these were done away with. Accountability was taken, the executive was not accountable, and therefore we have to bring 19A back. The question also arises about, do we need a presidential system or a parliamentary system? Whichever system, you need accountability. Independent commissions are important because check and balance on the executive. President can nominate, president can appoint, but who is he appointing? Somebody independent needs to actually check who he is appointing. Is the person fit and proper? This principle needs to be established. We need independent police commission. We need independent bribery commission. Because we had independence in the 19A, that is why a very close staffer of the former president was fixed, and he was brought to the justice system and judgment was given. Why independent police system? We don't have an independent bribery commission. That is why no significant politician or no significant official in this country has been basically convicted. Why? Even the research, the people investigating are given by the government, by the police. Governments change, all the investigators are changed. Things are pushed back. We need an independent SEBOC. A law is there, that law needs to be brought in quickly. We need independent procurement, independent audit, independent public service. These are absolutely essential. Power sharing is awesome. People are shouting and screaming there, saying we are not a part of the governance process. That's what these protests have been about. So you need power sharing. It needs to be taken to the level of the ground. Everything can't be decided in the center. Power sharing. People don't like the word devolution, but devolution is power sharing. We don't need to have the same tourism policy basically in Matara and the same tourism policy in Trincomalee or in Jaffna. Those local decisions can be taken. Central decisions are needed. We need it in foreign affairs, we need it in defense, we need it in monetary policy. That's very clear. But otherwise the principle of power sharing should be looked at. Justice is important. Laws delays have caused most of these problems, though it is not recognized. People don't have basically confidence in the legal system in this country. 17.5 years with 2 appeals, average for a case to be heard. What kind of ridiculous thing this is? You have the Attorney General, I'm a minister, is advisor to the government or to the minister. I steal, I rob. After that, he is supposed to be prosecuting me. It does not happen. Cases are put, governments change, cases are withdrawn. So, Attorney General's department should remain as advisor to the government. We need an independent prosecutor's office where once a case is put, it's independently determined, irrespective of governments being in office or not there. Systems change is about accountability and responsibility that people are asking for. Fundamental rights, lots of cases. I think we should increase the time period from 1 month to reasonable time periods. Access to justice. People must be able to access justice. Justice should be affordable. We should consider even the Court of Appeal. Maybe we should take it into the provinces. It's hard work. It needs lots of change. But these things are necessary to make it more accountable and also the executive accountable. We brought the 21st Amendment and we said a council of state because people in the protest were shouting that they are not being represented. Even though they have voted all these people in. They voted all these people. The people voted in people accused of murder. People voted in people who are peddling drugs. Responsibility goes two ways. You voted people and then you are saying that they are not accountable. You are also accountable. I am also accountable for that. We can't run away in a democracy by just pointing fingers at each other. We are all responsible, including all the people who have cast a vote are responsible for the situation that prevails in the country now. Okay. We need people who don't come into politics. We need to hear their views. We need to get their ideas. I believe in a public accountability system. We can have an assembly of those who come in. We have to determine how those people will come into that assembly and that their voices are heard and their advice is taken by those who are elected and those in government in forming policy and execution of policy. Another question arises. So often people say things like, the parties put forward candidates who are not suitable and therefore we have to vote on those candidates. No! You have a right to form your political party. Form a democratic political party. You can come through a democratic political party. You decide on the constitution. That is the way it should be. You can't handle all of these cultural changes that are needed only by the law, right? If you have to demand, then in existing political parties, you have to demand that there should be qualifications so that better candidates are put at the level of internal democracy in political parties. Those are things that you have to demand, or you don't have to vote for that political party in bringing forth these changes. Then the constitutional drafting process is important. You can't just appoint some committee you choose to constitutionally draft. You have to appoint people, you have to consult the public, you have to have public hearings, you have to have the constitutional assembly created to people's representatives, and a certain process needs to be followed. And this is the way we should go forward. I believe that in this parliament, as the president has already mentioned, that a new constitutional process will start. We have had consultations for 30 years, but now the time has come actually to implement it.
In the current context in the country, the opinion that surfaces is that all 225 members of parliament are not required. This does not mean that the 225 are not needed. In fact, there is a trust issue in the representatives people have appointed. The respect has diminished. People do not know what he or she is actually doing or the way they are operating in parliament. I see this as one problem. The second issue is that the rejection of the politics of the last 74 years. On the other hand, the issue that especially surfaced among those who were at the Aragale is that the proposal from them for a parallel system with the parliament or in parallel with the cabinet. Our proposal is to have a national assembly consisting of party leaders called a leadership council. We have suggested that ideas from professionals be sought in governance, especially by the people who are elected democratically. As the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, our leaders does not appoint our organizers. There is a process before the letter is given by the leader. There is an interview board, an interview panel. People come in for the interview. They discuss their information and talk. That is how we usually elect organizers for those seats. Therefore, people being appointed by a party leader is not a fair situation. We have an interview to select them as Sri Lanka Freedom Party. It is in that process a decision is made. Then the problem that is mentioned now is that there are no suitable candidates in the list to vote for the public. This is a serious accusation from the public, especially There are no suitable candidates for the people to choose for themselves from the list sometimes. Therefore, I think that as political parties, we all have a great responsibility to ensure that suitable and people who are acceptable to society are nominated, and those without charges of corruption. The citizen does not have a choice to select if candidates who are accused of murder and those who are alleged as corrupt and rejected by society are nominated again from the list. Along with this, constitutional reforms must be brought to the electoral system in the country.
We think that Sri Lanka is going through an extraordinary time at this moment, and we need to understand that moment correctly. The Aragalaya that we are seeing now has been calling for, or is calling for, transformation of our country, of our polity, of our social relations in fundamental ways. And it's important that we pay attention to that. It's important that we understand what the demands of the Aragalaya symbolize in a larger political and social context. One of the biggest things that we think as the National People's Power, as the NPP, that we need to deal with as a country is the social contract between the rulers and the citizens. And we think that this is a problem that has been unresolved in our country ever since independence. In many ways, we've been struggling to define this relationship, to define this contract in a way that is equitable, democratic, and just. And many of the problems that we've been facing since independence, whether it's the Northeast conflict, whether it's the southern insurrections, all of these moments, the sort of significant moments of political upheaval in our country have been, the underlying issue has been that social contract, and we have still not really come together to form a social contract that works fairly for everyone. So in that sense, we think a new constitution is absolutely essential. We have come to the limits of this current constitution. We have severe problems with the existing constitution. We have a critique of it, especially of the executive presidential system. But we think this can no longer be tinkered with. It needs a new constitution. And we think one of the primary fundamental questions that the new constitution should address is that social contract between the rulers and citizens, and what kind of relationship that should be. How do we ensure that there are no second-class citizens here, that citizens feel included and part of the system, whatever their identity, whether it's in individual identity in terms of gender, sexual orientation, or being part of a specific cultural ethnic community, whatever it is, there can no longer be second-class citizens in our country. So ensuring equality, equity, social justice for all, irrespective of difference, should be a primary fundamental principle in the new constitution. And we also think that in redefining this social contract between the citizen and the rulers, one of the things that we need to think about is how to strengthen democracy, how to strengthen democratic structures in our society, and how to enable citizens to participate more actively in their own in their own sort of political systems and political decisions. So we have several ideas that we are thinking about, that we are discussing. None of these are final, but these are up for discussion. One or two examples that I can give is, one, we know that during elections all political parties come up with manifestos that are simply forgotten after they get elected. And even right now we see that problem where there was overwhelming support for a particular manifesto, for a particular type of leadership, which never materialized. And also it doesn't take into account the fact that citizens also change their minds, that they can also change what their ideas about what is right could change. But there's no opportunity that is given in our system to accommodate that change. And we see that right now, we see that happening right now. So there are several things that we propose to address that. One is that we think a party that gets elected to power by presenting a particular manifesto, that has to be in some way justiciable, so that it's included there's some constitutional provision that is provided for a citizen who voted for a particular manifesto, and that manifesto, a party that comes into power by promoting a particular manifesto is bound to implement that, and that a citizen should have the right to go to court if necessary, if that manifesto is being undermined or not implemented properly. Then another proposal we have is to ensure the right to recall a representative, so that the citizens who elected a particular member don't have to wait for the end of the term of office in order to express their sentiments about a particular representative. If during during that period, if the representative violates certain fundamental agreements, is accused of corruption, whatever it is, that those who sent him to that position should have the ability to recall and call for new elections. We also think that things like crossovers should be prohibited, or crossover should mean that then you lose your seat, and that you have to come forward, you have to be re-elected, that you can't simply just cross parties and remain in your seat without that being without your constituents being given a chance to accept that or not. So things like that, in which citizens' participation in this system is strengthened. As the NPP, we are implementing something called, and I'm not sure how to translate this properly into Sinhala, but Kottasa Sabha, that is sort of people's councils at the local level, where we are setting those up by getting the community to appoint leaders from within that community, representative of that community, who then form an NPP Kottasa Sabha, NPP council for that particular local area. So that should we have asked that include youth representation, women's representation, that it's representative of that community, of the diversity within that community. And within our party structure, that council will have the power to influence what happens within the party. For instance, once we set this up properly, we are in the process of doing that, we think that they should be able to, for instance, propose nominations for elections in the future. Who should represent them at elections? Those ideas should come from the councils. Input into policy, input into the manifestos that the party develops needs to come from the council. So we have the council at the very local level. Then at the polling division level, there will be another layer, and then we have a district level representation as well, which through that system will be able to influence the party at the national level as well, so that there is conversation and a dialogue that is enabled across the party, and so that the decisions are not just taken at the top and sent down to the bottom, but there's a communication that goes both ways. So we think in these ways, in democratizing party structures as well as enabling greater citizen participation in decision making in matters of policy and politics, that's the way that we can democratize society. We are aware that a constitution can only do so much. Along with the constitution, you need political education, consciousness raising, and also opportunities for citizens to organize, to engage, if we really want to democratize our society. And we think those are and should be priorities for reform in the months and days as we go forward.
The constitution in our country has been amended 20 times since 1978. Majority of these amendments were introduced to serve the personal agendas of political parties or individuals. That is the reason there is confusion and chaos. And therefore, the people in the country, including the professionals and the experts, have continually called for a new constitution that is relevant and suitable for the current times we live in. My suggestion, therefore, regarding the constitution and what needs to be done is to identify the needs expressed by the people and therefore to introduce a new constitution, but not an amendment. Most of the people are calling for the executive presidential system to be abolished. If the presidential system is abolished, what will happen to the provincial councils? The issue of who will control the provincial council will also surface in this instance. These are matters that are interconnected. We have to make a decision whether we are going to make our country into a federal system or a unitary system. If you want a federal system, if we abolish the presidential system and retain the provincial councils, it can operate as a federal system. However, if the majority says that this should be a unitary state, then the president needs to have certain powers to control the provincial councils. Therefore, I believe that we should create a wider discourse, allow for a debate on this matter, and introduce a constitution that is suitable to the country. This should also receive the support and cooperation of all. If not, this cannot be achieved. Today we talk a lot about the Aragalaya. The Aragalaya protesters say that all 225 should be disbanded. They don't recognize them. So if we are trying to draft a constitution to the country, limited to the framework of the Aragalaya protesters, it will be a disaster for the country. That is why we say that we should bring in together a team that are knowledgeable and well versed in this matter, and then create a wider discourse and look at it from the angle of the people. And it should be a constitution designed for prosperity of the people and in a manner that will protect the sovereignty of the people.
In recent times, there have been calls for a radical change in our system of governance. The people who are calling for those change are saying we want a system change, not just change of heads, not change persons, but the entire system must change. If you look at their call, what they are asking for is a refined model of democratic rule. One can even call it direct democracy, because now we have a system where representatives are elected and sent, and once they are sent there for 5 years, they make all the decisions. People don't interact or intervene in those decisions. And also, as to who those representatives are is largely decided by the political parties. The political parties decide who candidates are, and people have very little choice, and they have to choose one or the other who's been put forward. So at both these levels, a radical change is necessary, and the kind of radical change that is sought cannot be done under the present constitution. We definitely need a new constitution, and a constitution that is framed as an out-of-the-box solution, not on any lines that we are used to thus far. So it must be the people who choose. Even the candidates, they must choose and put forward the candidates, and then vote amongst them, and create a people's councils at the bottom level, from where to the next level and to the other level representatives can be moved up, and then that becomes a people's council. So in the choice of who the representatives are, there will be a greater involvement of the people than political parties. At that level, when they start making decisions also, there must be the system where the people are consulted. All major decisions cannot be left in the hands of the representatives who constitute the council, but it must again have a system of going back. It must be two-way consultation, go back, and the people's views taken back to the council that can make the final decision. So, in this way we can strengthen democracy, because it becomes more a direct democratic institution rather than a representative democracy that we have right now. But we have also seen that this kind of change is necessary, and any constitutional reform must look in this direction, not just tinker with the current constitution or tinker with the ideas and the structures that we are used to, but make this fundamental system change, and then we may have succeeded in strengthening democratic rule in the country.
The constitutional reform process can adapt two methodologies. One is to work within the framework of the constitution. The other is to develop a constitution through a consultative process from among the masses in the country. We have had both these experiences within the short period after the post-independence history in this country. In 1971, we had a process of the entire elected body sitting as a constituent assembly and promulgating a constitution, which is an autochthonous constitution that was introduced in 1972 to the country. Then we also have the existing constitution, which stipulates that certain entrenched clauses are there. So, if you are to change those entrenched clauses, then you have to go for a referendum as well as a two-third majority in parliament. There are other provisions in the constitution which does not require a referendum, but could be approved by a two-thirds vote in parliament. But in any event, there is a feeling now, particularly after the Galle-Face protests among the people, that the entire parliament has lost its mandate already. In that case, you need to go for a new mandate. You have to set up a new parliament, and parliament has to either sit as a constituent assembly after laying down a manifesto in which they will say very openly that they would enact a new constitution through a constituent assembly, or otherwise to enact a new constitution through the existing constitutional framework, where you will have to have two-third vote in parliament as well as a referendum in case it impinges on the entrenched clauses. So, these are the methodologies that have to be followed, as well as now when it comes to the new constitutional provisions, there is an agitation to reduce the overbearing power of the executive in controlling parliament. Therefore, to reduce the powers of the executive president when it comes to dissolution of parliament, when it comes to the appointment of the prime minister and the cabinet, as well as assigning subjects to cabinet ministers. So, these are issues which has to see some reform. Several such discussions have taken place. Already the 19th amendment, or to revert back to the 19th amendment from the 20th amendment, has been presented as a 22nd amendment to parliament as an interim measure. But there is also, after the Galle-Face protests, a movement to have an entirely new constitution embodying several other reforms to improve democratic norms in the country, including the provision for direct democracy and its implementation in the country when it comes to important issues. Where there are important issues, people should be able to participate through a referendum to decide, not simply the executive and parliament in approving those matters which are thought to be critical, which may need a certain threshold of approval from parliament as well as through a referendum in the country. So, these are new issues that have come up. Hopefully, we could very soon get all these new provisions enacted into either as a temporary measure through an interim arrangement in the parliament, as well as through a permanent feature as a new constitution to the entire country.
What we have proposed in the Constitution is that the needs and expectations of the people cannot be fulfilled by just reintroducing the 19th Amendment. We are a party representing an oppressed group of people. We have national issues, but no one has solved them. There's a 13th Amendment in the Constitution, but it has not been implemented. It has not been implemented enough, but it cannot be abandoned. It should be 13 plus and should go beyond that. If civil society thinks that bringing independent commissions and bringing good governance, bringing the rule of law, bringing freedom of media, bringing police and judicial reform, everything is right, no, they're wrong. We're all in agreement to these institutions. But what we need to do is to go beyond and find solutions to the national problems. The main reason for this current crisis faced in our country today is the national issue. The war is over, but the national problem is not solved. There is now an opinion that the voting system should be changed in the electoral system. But we do not propose to change the current proportional system. There's a misconception among civil society. They say that the preference system should be avoided. The people who are scattered are represented in parliament because of the proportional system. It is not only for the minority ethnic groups, even for minority political parties. Now, JVP is a minority party, not only for the minority people, but for the minority parties. There is an opportunity to give power to minority parties through this system. This is why they get the opportunity to come to parliament, or the system will be limited to 2 parties. We must understand that. Now, there are people from Daragalia. They are young people. How can they come to parliament? It is not possible to come in this electoral system. The electoral system is in the Constitution. There is no time now to bring a new Constitution. Bring the 21st Amendment, cancel the 20th, then go for a new election. Let's get a new mandate. New ministers will be elected. There is no problem. The brothers who are in Daragalia can also come. We should come together and create a new Constitution. How can we do this in the present parliament? With 134 votes, Rajapaksa's representative has become the president. It is ridiculous to say that this parliament represents the people. This is not what the people are asking. A new constitution cannot be expected in this distorted parliament. But I will say one thing, that the story of rejecting all 225 is completely wrong. How can it be only the 225? There are 2 sides to a democratic coin, heads and tails. One side is elected. The other side is the voters on the other side. If those who get elected are making mistakes, people can campaign and send them home. Now, recently people ran away, no? It is also possible to lose the election. But people who vote also need to be made aware. They need to understand politically. They need to find out the details before they vote. You need to know how to vote for a suitable person. If that does not happen, there will be a group similar to the present bunch coming to the next election. Therefore, the people should understand. Just as they are blaming those who obtain the votes, we should ask ourselves whether we have sent the right people. Instead of those who obtain money, who are racist, religious extremists, separatists, terrorists, vote for candidates who loves the people, who has a vision of honesty and dedication, and who can speak at least 2 languages in this multi-ethnic country. Then there will be a prosperous future. Otherwise, there's no point in blaming one side. That is my opinion. The idea of a new constitution has come up once again. According to our opinion, the Election Commission should be empowered. On one hand, the Election Commission should reject party constitutions without internal democracy of the parties. Also, a specific tradition should be established in the country where after an election defeat, the main leaders leave and other leaders come to power. A democratic environment should be created within the country. Also, when selecting candidates, the ability to listen to the wishes of the local and regional members of the parties should be achieved. Some countries hold primary elections to choose the candidates. Candidates are then selected through the primary elections. Sometimes they also choose presidential candidates or the prime ministerial candidate through such a process. It is essential. The second is campaign finances. There should be a definite control over the finances during an election by the Election Commission. Most of the time, attention is paid only to the use of state properties. It should be left to the Election Commission to lay down specific rules for electoral campaigns for not only the use of state property, but also the use of wealth earned illegally. Similarly, the use of mass media. Despite issues with the print media, it is the electronic media that is widely used in this country. Now, the frequencies belong to the people. The internet belongs to the people. Therefore, it is essential to empower the Election Commission for intervention to maintain a balance in the use of the internet and the electronic media. Otherwise, they are operated in an extremely corrupt manner. Also, there is a tradition that the public should have outside this constitution. Now the country is bankrupt. People are asking what happened to us, rather than looking for who should be held responsible for this disaster. If we had acted with some kind of understanding before the event, this disaster could have been avoided. Therefore, the public should understand these traditions. If a candidate wins after contesting for presidential election, then the candidate should retire from politics after serving the due term. If a candidate is defeated, then he should retire from politics. After a major election defeat, the party leaders should resign from their posts and give the opportunity to others. In the same way, they need to give the same opportunity to other candidates. The country needs a party tradition that hates family politics and ill-gotten wealth. The need for a constitution in Sri Lanka is a topic that has been talked for a long time. It is also a struggle. It is the struggle that has now come to the streets. There's a problem in Sri Lanka that making of these laws or other policy making has been carried out as if it were a matter confined to a certain elite group. And now it has become the common opinion of the public that it is so. I think this is a positive side of the struggle that I see. When we say there is a new proposal, politics is not only the reason for the many problems that have risen in our country. The main problem in our country is with the administration. There is an error in the representation, and the public will not be properly represented. But it should not only be viewed from the representation, but also from the service that the public receives. Let me take an example. We appoint our representatives to political authority. How do we receive the service from them? They will serve us through the existing administrative system. We can say that the electoral division system, which is selected by the voting system or any divisional system or whatever system of elections. But when the output comes for it, it comes in a different way. There is no similarity. How many people is represented by one MP? How many people does he serve? The electorate is small, but the administrative division he has to serve is large. Otherwise, it will be the other way around. They are elected from a small division and provides a service at the district secretary or divisional secretary levels, which has more population. The gap between these two is the agreement between us. There's a big contradiction in the agreement between the state and the people. That is why first we have to make the demarcation of Sri Lanka through a right criteria. For example, do we have a specific criteria for the population of a Gamadadari division? Do we have a number to say how many people should be represented under one divisional secretariat office, at least roughly? And also the district. In general, let's look at it from the other side, whether the people are represented in the parliament and the nature. If we make something like this roughly on the exact size of each GN, we can combine 3 GNs to make one division. The person then becomes a representative of the local council or the municipal council, both of which are now connected. Also, we can create provincial council divisions by combining 2 divisions after making the divisional secretary's office area the size of the general population. Is it represented there? Also, if it's possible for us to decide by combining 4 provincial council divisions and sending 1 person to parliament, here the public representatives have certain proportion to representation at the local level. Also, there's a proportion on how the provincial councils are represented. Similarly, when going to the district level, how will it be represented? To put it bluntly, the current shortcomings is that the area of one candidate contesting for parliament is the same as the person contesting the provincial council. Both are getting votes in their district. So the expectation from the public, from the members of the provincial council is the same as the expectation they have from the members of parliament. Even if he is a local authority, there's an expectation that he should do work of the provincial council or a parliament member. There's a feeling that all elected representatives should represent the public at all times. That is why you see parliament members building the village roads and bridges. A local government councillor has come to a position where he's talking about global politics. Then the divisional areas have not been clarified and work without any criteria is happening. If that is the case, when we make the constitution, we need to address this issue. In the meantime, what has now come is what the public is protesting. We have a system to get the services from the politicians without establishing any criteria about the services we need to get from the governance system we have established. This is wrong. This is the issue with the system. It is my hope that changing the system means not only developing the constitution, but also addressing the administrative aspect. If we look into it properly, both can be fulfilled. There's a discussion about going back to the 19th in the recent constitutional reform, which is very good. It is a good positive feature. But the fact that the 22nd reform alone is not enough is what the Sri Lanka Communist Party believes in as a party. The reason for that is the real representatives are not appointed in the current election system. There are very few spaces where real representatives can be appointed. Therefore, if these spaces are kept like this and another election is held in another year or half or maybe a fixed time, then again this distorted situation will arise. Therefore, our request is to provide the 22nd Amendment as well as a new election system very closely at the same time. There is some justice for the voice of the people who fought these democratic rights if this can be achieved. When talking about constitutional reforms, this 9th Parliament is one of the mostly politically debated parliaments in history. At least it will be possible to do something positive in this Parliament if we are able to work out for these reforms. As a party, we mainly state that there is a need for constitution, a new constitution. We need a real constitution that represents the aspirations of the people. Until a positive constitution is developed, a new provision should be introduced regarding the electoral system. Also, if democracy is to be strengthened in this country, a system should be created to improve the political consciousness of the people. Because people have been voting since the day universal suffrage was established in our country. It is always the elected rulers and the governments that we have through a democratic system. However, there are always heavy criticism of the government among society. In the last 74 years after independence, there has been criticisms of the parliamentary tradition also. Also, there is a lot of criticism about the economic system based on the constitution of the Second Republic, which is based on the open economy from 1978 until now. Therefore, to provide real answer to these criticisms, we need to create our own constitution that suits the country. During the entire struggle, there was a demand of the people for democracy in this country and to create a system that can integrate the contribution of the educated and the intelligent. One of the main points of the proposal proposed by us as independent parties is to appoint a separate advisory board for each ministry. Regarding the representatives of the advisory board, a system should be created to include professionals and experts on the subject as well as the youth of this society. We also made an open request that there should be some representation from the group that contributed to this struggle. There was extensive discussion on the election of members to the Constituent Assembly. The question is whether it should be from the Parliament or how do we get about appointing representatives from outside. At that time, from our side, we suggested to appoint external representatives and members, professionals, academics, specially representing those organizations to the Constituent Assembly. Because we believe that this would make the Constituent Assembly a true representative Constituent Assembly, with the Constituent Assembly acting as the authority for the selection and appointments as valid representation.
Under the present circumstances, I have been asked, what is the nature of constitutional changes that need take place in the light of the failure of the earlier constitutions and the present plight of the country? Well, I would say there is a definite movement among people that there must be a change. Only thing is that change, there is no consensus with regard to the change that should take place. But I would say the change that would bring benefit to the country and make all constituent people in this country to benefit by it would be to set up a confederal constitution. A confederal constitution gives the sovereignty to the units which form the main body. So each of them will be sovereign as far as they are concerned. Now if you divide Sri Lanka into 5 units, each unit will be sovereign as far as they are concerned, and they will have a federal central government looking after the interests of the entire country from the point of view of foreign policy and monetary matters and so on and so forth. So, confederal, the benefit that is there as between federal and confederal is, federal, the sovereignty lies in the central government. Confederal, the sovereignty lies with the unit, the constituent units. And as far as unitary is concerned, all these days the problem that has been we have been facing so far has been, it's a dictatorship of the majority. There is a domineering feature on the part of the Sinhala Buddhists who are the majority of being able to lay the law, so to say, with regard to the minorities. Now, as far as the northern and eastern provinces are concerned, they are not minorities. They are majorities in their own areas. They were always majorities in those areas for over 3,000 years, and they have been brought into the main system in 1833 by the Britishers, who wanted to have a centralized government. Then when the independence came on, they handed it over as it is to the Sri Lankans, and the majority being Sri Lankans, being Sinhalese, they have now set up a dictatorship of the majority as far as these areas are concerned. But the Tamils are the majority in the northern and eastern provinces, so we must remember that. So under the circumstances, the most important aspect of the constitutional change that is expected is that they recognize the rights of the minorities and make a constitution to suit the minorities, and that constitution, as far as we could see, would be the setting up of a confederal constitution. Now, with regard to minorities, there are two sets of people who can be called minorities. There are one set of minorities who are spread among the majority various places. They are minorities in the area where the majority are people other than themselves. So that sort of minorities. There are other minorities who have a discernible area which they occupy, which they have been always occupying. They have a language of their own, they have a culture of their own, they have religions other than the religions of the majority, and so on. And they have been having that as the homelands, traditional homelands as far as they are concerned, and those are majorities in their own areas, but they were made minorities by joining up the two provinces with the other 7 provinces. So the distinction has not been understood by our Sinhalese brethren, and they always thought there are two things which have been lacking among the Sinhalese. They always thought the Tamils came only in the 10th century during Chola time, which is all nonsense, because now there is enough evidence that the Tamils have been here for more than 3,000 years. Then the second one was that they were minorities like everybody else, whether it is the Muslims or the upcountry Tamils or anybody else, that they are minorities. They are not minorities in the strict sense of the minority, in the strict sense of the term. They are majority in their own areas who have been made into minorities by joining up with the rest of the country. So if you take that into consideration and prepare a constitution to suit the needs of all these communities, and all take into consideration also the fact that North and East has always been a separate area, separate language, separate religion, separate culture, and so on, separate way of life, then it will be easy for us to set up the type of new constitution which I believe, my party believes, should be a confederal constitution.
The debate on constitutional reform of Sri Lanka has been renewed recently. This is because the citizens have woken up politically, and the opinion that reforms are needed has come out very strongly. The ordinary citizens have raised two main themes. The first one was that they strongly criticized the existing political system and constitution and political structures in Sri Lanka. One of the characteristics of Sri Lanka's democracy is decaying democracy. There was strong criticism of this decaying democracy. A representative democracy primarily works centered on parliamentary representative democracy. This means that there is a breakdown of citizens' trust in Sri Lanka's parliament, which is the main institution of the representative democracy in Sri Lanka. Citizens have a belief that MPs who are elected to parliament are using political power and the public mandate given to them for self-seeking measures to serve their own personal agendas rather than serving the public. Therefore, due to these reasons, citizens think that this system does not represent them, despite a mandate given to the people. This mandate is used to serve the wants and needs of the elected candidates. So the public is looking for representatives who understand their grievances and who truly represent their grievances and demands. And the public has been greatly disappointed at this violation of their mandate. So in this way, Sri Lanka's representative democracy has been heavily criticized for the shortcomings within the parliamentary democracy. If we are thinking about a new constitution, it should not only be about bringing the 19th Amendment or going back to the parliamentary democracy. In my opinion, the most important principal argument that emerged from the citizens' movement in the last 4 to 5 months is that democracy in Sri Lanka is neoliberal and that Sri Lanka has a democratic system which is now distorted through a strict authoritarian presidential system. What we want is not the superficial surface level changes, but a rebuilding of Sri Lanka's democracy, which needs to undergo fundamental reforms and also to connect it with a process of deepening and expanding democracy. What is the fundamental conceptual aspect? I strongly believe that there should be a discussion about it in Sri Lanka. The reason for this is that many people still think that if the constitution is to be reformed, it should only be done within the limited framework of a representative democracy. Now we have to think about a constitutional reform process in Sri Lanka without abandoning representative democracy and liberal democracy. While maintaining both, there needs to be a discussion and a wider discourse on how elements of direct democracy and republican democracy can be constructively linked to this. So we can actually find examples from the world in other countries to support this new way of thinking. Another argument that has emerged is that we need to have a check and balance system to prevent the misuse of political power by the rulers and also using it as community oppressors by the rulers. Now, this does not allow either the executive or the legislature to have checks and balances in which the constitution itself determines at the moment. Therefore, the most important idea that emerged from the past citizens' movement is that if the state power politics is misused by someone, or if it's used to oppress the community, citizens, or in that sense, organized citizens, have a very strong force to prevent it. As of today, Sri Lanka's democracy has been seized and hijacked by a small political class that uses their extreme corrupt power to only serve for themselves. So one of the strongest arguments that emerged from the movement is that we do not want selfish political class to hold control of the country's democracy. This should be taken back by the citizens. Now, how do we use the historical moment to reintroduce or strengthen democracy in Sri Lanka? How can we feed not only the limited ideas of the generated political class and their representatives, but infuse the rich and creative ideas from the citizen?